Young people in Vancouver are not going to be buying houses anytime soon, maybe never.
What will we do when the market stops? This won't last forever.
It's about money. Even some of the investors are being priced out.
Who are we building the city for?
This is also an issue that can drive people apart. It can drive a wedge between races.
If you've lived here for a long time, this is your world falling apart.
At today's prices, it would take a young person 23 years to save up for a down payment on a detached home. That's almost twice the national average. To make matters worse, there's very little data being collected at any level of government. Not just about what's going on, but who's responsible, who's affected, and exactly how it's happening. Luckily, some academics and journalists are picking up the slack. The Globe and Mail's Kathy Tomlinson is one of a handful of reporters who've moved beyond trends and percentages and dug into the boots-on-the-ground realities of the city's housing market. And over the past few months, she's uncovered some shocking truths about the darker side of the real estate game.
You can see a few of them. This one here is empty. I know the one up there is empty because I did some reporting on it. You know, and some of them are in the middle of being built, you know, various stages. And if you live here, and if you've lived here for a long time, this is your world falling apart.
Right, because you talk to people who still do live here, right? And I mean, what kind of sense were you getting from them as far as their feelings on things?
Loss of community, loss of a sense of, you know, who their neighbors are. And what that leads to is more people sell, ironically. Even though they don't want to lose their community, they feel like it's going anyway, so, well, maybe I should sell too. And on it goes from there.
Something else that you were talking about and writing about recently was this whole aspect of shadow flipping.
Nobody knew what that was until we discovered it. It's essentially realtors and their clients using a little-known legal maneuver, perfectly legal, to flip houses really quickly, to flip them before they're even actually sold. So what it is the buyer buys the house and turns around immediately before the contract closes and assigns that contract, sells it, to another buyer for a higher price. So whoever's selling the house initially only gets what he or she sold their house for, but then it's sold for a higher price to another buyer and they don't get any of that money.
For young people, young professionals who aren't going to be buying a house anytime soon, I mean, how does that affect us?
Arguably, it's one of the things that's driving up the prices, right? Whenever the price goes up at one house, the price goes up next door. The Premier has promised she'll get rid of shadow flipping, but that will not necessarily address the bigger issue, and that's what a lot of people are upset about, and that is foreign ownership, just the driving factor that's underpinning all of this.
The really nice thing about it is this is an issue that brings people together. The fear that I have is this is also an issue that can drive people apart. So you can talk about young and old. Did you get into the market at the right time? Or the boomers always get everything? And, you know, it can drive apart a wedge between ages. It can drive a wedge between races. It's very easy for people to say, oh, the Chinese investors are making our life unaffordable here and they're not bringing anything. And forget the fact that it's government's job to regulate those activities, and that's where government is failing right now.
I mean, let's face it, there is a terrible history of racialization and marginalization in this city in terms of its Aboriginal populations and its Asian populations. You have to begin with that recognition of that as an unfortunate foundational characteristic of the city and region.
So this isn't a race question so much as a money question.
And I think that that's precisely a way to frame it, is that it's really looking at money and where it's sourced, as opposed to a race question.
How does it affect the affordability of the city if all of these buildings are sitting empty and owned by investors rather than owners?
Well, it leads into a really interesting question towards not only what we're building in the city, but who are we building the city for?
We're here in Kitsilano to talk to David Lay, who's a geographer and a UBC professor. He's been studying the phenomenon of Vancouver's housing market for more than 20 years. And his argument is that this isn't anything new. This is a result of something that started back in the 1980s when the government was looking to reignite the provincial economy with global capital. We want to find out how things got this way and what we can do about it.
It's not as if we suddenly had a housing problem here. I believe it is considerably worse now, but I want to emphasize that this was a made-in-Canada problem.
There's a lot of talk, particularly around this issue that brings things like race into it, because I mean, we are talking about global capital. I mean, but in your mind, is this a race issue or is this a money issue?
I think it's important to remember that a settler colony like Canada, or settler society, has always imported capital. In the early days, it was from the UK. Then it was from the US. China just happens to be the largest source of capital in the world that is actively seeking to get out of its own territory. And I have found consistently that people who play the race card want the discussion to end. They do not want a serious discussion. We've been now 20 years without a federal housing policy in Canada. You know, that's a big hole that's been created.
So this is a capital issue, but I mean, is it also on our side of things, is it also a regulatory issue? Is it also a governmental issue?
Well, it's very much a governmental issue. It was government that established very low criteria for people to qualify as business immigrants. I've even heard real estate agents who are very concerned about what's happening here and feel that there needs to be regulation.
So this house was just listed for just under $2 million. This is what $2 million gets you, is basically, it's not quite a tear down. I know it might look like a tear down, but it's not quite a tear down.
Yeah.
It would be a complete gut job.
$2 million, you think? The lifestyles of the rich and famous.
Here we have the beautiful master bedroom. This is your paradise. The gorgeous kitchen in the original 70s condition. So obviously appliances have been updated a little bit. You have your mustard-colored toilet, mustard-colored sink, and the bathtub shower.
This house, I mean, how long was this house on the market?
Oh, just the weekend.
What?
Yeah. So you're dealing with multiple offers in, I would say, almost every transaction that goes through right now, especially as closer you get to downtown.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about foreign investment and empty homes and that. And I mean, as a real estate professional, do you find the idea that homes are being purchased, not being lived in, is that frustrating?
Yeah, and I'm actually working with an overseas buyer right now who's in Hong Kong, I believe. And she asked me, you know, what do I have to do as an overseas buyer? What do I have to be careful of, or what tax implications do I have to be aware of? And I said, nothing. You know, everyone knows the Chinese economy took a hit a while back, and so people are wanting to get their money out of that, and they're dumping it into the Vancouver real estate, and they're grasping anything that's for sale.
In the media, there's been a lot of discussion, especially recently, about some unethical practices within the real estate industry, things like shadow flipping and that. I mean, as a real estate professional, how do you feel when you look at that kind of thing happening within your industry? So
there has been some very unethical realtors, like we said, shadow flipping, assigning the contract 2 or 3 times even before it closes. They're definitely not working in the best interest of their client, for sure. I mean, that's someone you have to really watch out, and that comes down to making sure you pick a right agent.
Literally nothing has happened since we started raising this issue a year ago in a serious way. There's been no change in the regulations and the taxes and the accountability and the structures. They've made commitments to do various things, but really there has been no change.
Why do you think that there's so much indifference from the provincial government over this whole housing situation?
The economy here is very fragile, and one of the bright spots in terms of provincial government revenues is the property transfer tax. And so they don't really want to mess with the one thing that seems to be going okay in the economy. But at the same time, there is a cost to that kind of, frankly, I think, empty economic activity of building investments for international investors.
BC Premier Christy Clark has rejected any measures intended to cool the province's housing market. We reached out to the Ministry of Finance for their take on the problem, and this is what they said. The key to improving housing affordability over the long term is creating new supply. The province is not considering measures that would force down the value of people's assets and prevent sellers from obtaining a fair market price. The province urges municipal leaders and regional directors to use the tools at their disposal to support the province's efforts and further the creation of new housing supply.
We're a growing city, and we got to keep up with that. That doesn't make people who want everything to stay the same happy. People that want their neighborhoods to remain frozen in time, hey, I'm sorry, but the world doesn't work like that.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, the city gets, in the media and public spaces, gets a lot of flack for a lack of action on affordable housing. I mean, how much power does the city actually have?
Yeah, the city has fairly limited powers, and we don't have the legal jurisdiction to intervene on the market, to figure out foreign ownership and what we should do about that. That's all in those other government levels. We can't put a luxury tax. We've asked for a tax on luxury homes to shift some of that money into more affordable housing. We've asked for a flipping tax to slow down the speculation on the market. We can't do that. We've been calling repeatedly to the province, to the feds, and saying, you got to help us. You got to deal with a market that's skyrocketed, and you got to make sure that people on low incomes in particular aren't getting pushed out of the city and or ending up on the street.
So is it frustrating then to be asking for help at a provincial level and just not getting anything back?
It is frustrating because housing is about homes. Like, first and foremost, it's about people having a place to live. It's not a commodity. And so people that are treating it as a commodity, they should have to pay more to do that. They're trading, in something that is a requirement of life for other people.
With current rates of price increase, doctors, nurses, firefighters, police, they will be priced out of the market in 5 years.
So then if things don't change, then what does the future look like for Vancouver's young people?
The way that change is created is often through crisis, unfortunately. We have a record low number of 18 to 35-year-olds coming to Vancouver, numbers that we've never seen before. And we can avoid a very acute crisis if we keep the pressure on right now.
Housing is not being a big political issue at those levels of government, and that has to change. Like, we, collectively, young people in particular have to apply pressure. And in the provincial election that's coming up, housing and affordable housing needs to be an issue. Renters' rights needs to be an issue.
It's just one thing after another in this market because it is an out-of-control market, and government is so consistent in refusing to intervene in a meaningful way.
There are a lot of people purchasing mansions and they're sitting on them because they're waiting for permits to come through for renovations or for demos, or they're waiting to flip them. In the meantime, they're being listed as rentals, sometimes for very cheap.
The whole house costs $6,300 a month. So on average per person is somewhere around $500.
It's a 1990 Dodge Pleasureway camper van that we completely renovated. We kept a lot of the original cabinets and stuff. I think most people are kind of envious about it.
I think they're envious a lot because we don't pay rent.